Welcome to The Source, where we combine the headlines with in-depth conversations with the newsmakers themselves. Today on the program, charter change is alive.
The Speaker really wanted to correct it as soon as possible.
As the House produces its own draft federal constitution.
If there will be a appeal from the leadership to fast track it, then the minority will support it.
Key provisions spark controversies.
The only thing I added was a provision that instead of establishing the federal states, there's a mechanism to establish federal states. All the other provisions were already submitted by the Congress.
As it removes term limits and the vice president in the line of succession. But what happens now to the version forwarded by the Consultative Committee? Former Chief Justice and CONCOM Chairman Reynato Puno joins us in the program. And later, cake served in glasses? That's for today's In Focus. Thank you for joining us. Sitting in for Pinky Webb, I'm Ruth Cabal. House Speaker Gloria Macapagal Arroyo wants the provision on the Vice President and the line of succession back in the draft federal charter. This after the lower house came up with their own version of a federal charter which drew criticisms from various sectors. With two proposals, both seeking to change the form of government, how can we be sure that the right one will prevail? Let's go straight to the source of the story. Former Chief Justice and Consultative Committee tasked to review the 1987 Charter Chairman, Reynato Puno. Welcome to the show, sir. It's an honor again to have you with us.
Thank you, Ruth.
Sir, so as we have seen, the House came up with their own version of this draft federal constitution, and well, there were several criticisms against it. What's your overall reaction, sir?
Well, first of all, we would like to thank the House Committee headed by Congressman Veloso for reviving this debate on federalism. And we also would like to thank the members of the committee for adopting some of the provisions which we propose in our draft federal constitution. But having said that, and after examining the House version, we see some provisions there, very important provisions, which are at war with our own version. And the more specific provision I am referring to refers to the abolition of the ban on political dynasties.
Mm-hmm. Because in the past you were saying that the that's one of the main features of having the federalist government, federalism, sir.
That's right. Mm-hmm. It's one of the main predicates of our federal version. And also, we like to think that that is a necessary provision to give life to the constitutional doctrine that there must be free access, mm-hmm. equal access to a public office. Mm-hmm. In other words, that is a mechanism that we thought is necessary to strengthen the democratic republican character of our government.
Mm-hmm. And there were also, do you share the view, kasi some were also saying na baka daw kasi the version of the House is just meant to perpetuate others in power, like maybe the House Speaker, and then it will just make the political elite daw stronger, especially without the anti-dynasty provision.
It's, of course, speculative, mm-hmm. but that is precisely one of the dangers when this task of amending or revising the Constitution is put in the hands of Congress when they assemble as a constituent assembly. In other words, as I have warned before, the members of Congress will be placed in conflicted positions. And that is not good, that is not fair to them, because that will open up a lot of speculations, which may not be fair to them.
So you're saying now that baka this might not be a good idea for them to have their own draft version or stick with the CONCOM's version?
Yeah, that's right. For instance, that ban against political dynasties will affect a great number of congressmen as well as senators. And so when they drop that ban against political dynasties, the people may think that they are doing that to protect their self-interest.
Have you spoken with Speaker Arroyo? You were her Chief Justice under her administration before.
No, we presented our draft to then Speaker Alvarez. And then, of course, there was a reorganization of the House. The Committee on Constitutional Amendment was also revamped. Formerly, it was headed by Congressman Roger Mercado, and then Congressman Veloso took over. When he took over, we had some sessions with him where some members of the Consultative Committee were called to a hearing, and they were asked to explain about the philosophy, the rationale of some of the provisions in our draft constitution.
But were you surprised with how it came out, with how their version came out? And you said there were some provisions that were practically at war with your version, with the committee's version.
Well, I was more surprised on the timing of the referral to the plenary session of the House resolution. But before that, the House version during the speakership of Speaker Alvarez already did not have that anti-political dynasty provision. And their version also lifted the term limits. And so I was not really surprised that those features were retained by the Veloso version.
But with the timing, sir, why were you surprised?
Well, because the marching order of Speaker GMA, as I read it in the newspapers, is to hold the hearings of this draft federal constitution, consult with the Senate first on how the process can be fast-tracked. In fact, I read in the papers that the House was willing to have separate voting on the part of the Senate and on the part of the House on this particular issue. During the time of Speaker Alvarez, the two houses were deadlocked on this issue.
Do you think it has something to do with trying to, catch up with the May 2019 elections, or do you think that they have to do with?
I'm not sure. I am not privy to the reason for this new debate on the federal constitution.
But what's your next move now, sir? See, Professor Edwin Tayo was saying that the committee is drafting a letter to be sent to the president.
Yes, we are soliciting the individual views of all the members of the consultative committee, and they have sent in their views except for one or two. Thereafter, we shall consolidate these viewpoints and write a letter to the president, seek his audience, so that we can have his appropriate advice.
But initially, what's the biggest concern of the committee, sir?
The biggest concern is the kind of federalism that is being espoused by the House version. Well, personally, and this is a personal view, I have studied the draft, and it does not appear to me as a real federalism. Mm-hmm. It would seem that it is Unitarianism mm-hmm. dressed in federalism. Mm-hmm. You know, the main feature of a federal government is the clear delineation of powers between the federal government and the constituent states. This division of powers would divide the exclusive powers of government, the shared powers, as well as the reserve powers. And the division of powers should be written in the Constitution itself. Mm-hmm. This cannot be given by means of a law passed by Congress. Mm-hmm. That is the essence of federalism. In this House version, there is no allocation of powers mm-hmm. Between the federal government and the states. It is Congress that will first entertain a petition mm-hmm. on the part of provinces that would like to federate. Mm-hmm. That is why some call this optional federalism, but there is no such thing as optional federalism. Mm-hmm. And as I stated, now the power to federalize should not come from Congress itself. Mm-hmm. The division of power should already be clearly written in the Constitution.
Okay, let's talk more about that, sir. Very interesting yung sinasabi niyong optional federalism. We'll be taking a short break. Former Chief Justice and CONCOM Chairman Reynato Puno will still be with us after the break. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. Our guest today, former Chief Justice and CONCOM Chairman Reynato Puno. Sir, you were talking about optional federalism. Let's also look at the tweet of another CONCOM member, Professor Ranhilio Aquino. No? He was also talking about this when he read the draft of the coming from the House Committee. And that's what he's saying. I have just read what apparently the lower house has passed around as its version of a draft revised constitution. It is curious, it is intriguing, it is confusing. The core proposal is what I shall call optional federalism. Sir, yun yung sinasabi niyo, bakit kaya magiging ganun? Parang mamimili lang kung sino yung maging under the federalism? Ganun po ba yun?
Yes. If you read the House version, the version admits that their draft is strengthening local autonomy towards federalism. To me, that is very revealing. Federalism is not immediately embraced. The stress of the House version is to promote local autonomy, going towards federalism. And moreover, the House version does not address the needs of our regions that are identity-based. I refer, for instance, to the Bangsamoro and to the Cordillera region. Now, these two regions require an asymmetric treatment of their needs and their demands. You look at the House version, there is no reference at all to the Bangsamoro and to the Cordillera regions. And yet, looking back, this is the principal reason why President Duterte espoused federalism. And he keeps on emphasizing that we need federalism to address the needs of our Muslim brothers, as well as the needs of the Cordillera region. And yet you look at the House version, nothing is mentioned about their asymmetric needs.
So how dangerous is that optional federalism, sir?
Yeah, the optional federalism, that means there is yet no federalism. And the power to determine the shape, the size of what would be the federal states would depend on Congress itself. And as I said, that should not be done because the comprising states should already be placed in the Constitution. The powers that should be given to them should already be spelled out in the Constitution
itself. Yes. And another one, sir, one of the most controversial provisions also, they're saying they will remove this again, but yung isa yung pagtanggal sa Vice President sa line of succession. Can we just get your thoughts on that, sir?
Well, it's already a moot issue. As we know, the House committee relented on its version and already corrected the provision on succession. And that should be.
But what is your take on that, sir?
Of course, the House version has to be corrected. There is no reason to eliminate the Vice President from the line of succession. When we elect a Vice President, part of the decision of the people is that in case of vacancy in the office of the President, the Vice President should succeed as the #2 highest official of the land. That is part of the decision of the voters.
But what do you think of that move? Ang sinasabi po nila because of the pending electoral protest of former Senator Bongbong Marcos against Vice President Robredo, for them to even make that provision, come up with that provision.
Again, it's their rationale, but I'm glad that they relented on their own viewpoint.
Chief Justice, another one is the removal of term limits. 4 years yung mga officials, but then there's no ban on re-election.
Well, again, it's a point that I would like to think would not be acceptable to the public. You know, for all intentioned purposes, the term limits should not have been lifted because this is part of the political reforms that should be followed, should be given life in the shift towards federalism. And again, I am saying that this is necessary in order to complement the prohibition against political dynasties.
Another one there, sir, yung pag-elect ng senators nationwide and not by regions.
Well, in our draft, we suggested that the election of senators should be by region. And there is a very fundamental reason for that. That is to address the anomalous situation where in a national election of senators, almost always we see Visayas and Mindanao sometimes unrepresented and oftentimes underrepresented. And we thought that that should be remedied because that is not a good democratic result. We should follow the rule that is followed in the United States where they situate that every state has a representative in the Senate. Whether the state is big or small, the representation of all states is assured. That follows the principle of equalizing the unequal. The unequal referring to the small states. In our case, the unequal would refer to Visayas and Mindanao. And we thought that there should be no area that will be unrepresented or underrepresented in the upper house of our Congress.
So at this point, sir, do you think it's confusing that there are now two versions? Would you appeal to the House to just endorse or make it a more closer version to the Concoms?
Well, yes, and I can see that the House is still open to some suggestions and further debates. And we see that when the House leadership corrected itself on the matter of excluding the Vice President in the line of succession. So we see some window of hope. Yeah.
Willing ba kayo to reach out or even to the to House Speaker Arroyo herself?
Of course, the real power to amend or revise the Constitution belongs to the two houses. We can only make some suggestions, and it's really up to them. It's their constitutional power to determine what should be the final shape of our Constitution, subject, of course, to the results of an appropriate referendum or plebiscite.
Okay, but on your part, sir, ano po ang timetable niyo? You said susulat kayo kay President and then seek an audience with him. When
Yes,
do we expect that? Or
Well, we will just inform the President of these latest developments. After all, the draft that we prepared is the executive version. Actually, the ownership of this belongs to the President, and so it's but appropriate that we take our cue from the President.
but briefly, sir, let's go to another issue, yung selection of the next Chief Justice, because si Chief Justice Teresita de Castro has retired, and what scenario are we looking at now? Wala pang napipili ang JBC and the President also.
The JBC has opened up the position so that people who are interested can file their application. And the rules on how to choose a Chief Justice or the justices of the Supreme Court are well laid out in the rules of the Judicial and Bar Council. And so we'll wait for the last day for the filing of applications. And the JBC, I suppose, will follow the usual process of vetting the applicants, looking at whether they are prima facie qualified, and conduct the appropriate interviews, and then prepare the shortlist for submission to the President.
What should be, you think, yung main qualifications talaga, or considerations, the seniority, and then what other issues should be considered, sir, for the selection of the...
By and large, the Chief Justice is taken from from the ranks of the associate justices, and seniority is a big factor, but it is not the only factor to be considered. Well, that does not also bar an outsider from applying and from being included in the short list. And there is that chance also that an outsider can be chosen as a Chief Justice. There is no prohibition against that. But as I said, the tradition is to choose from among the associate justices in the court itself.
Briefly, sir, do you think at this point the judiciary has been politicized with what happened to the former Chief Justice Sereno and all the other issues?
I would not use the word politicized, but I would say that some of the events that took place are unfortunate. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much to former Chief Justice and CONCOM Chairman Reynato Puno. Always an interesting discussion with you, sir. This is The Source on CNN Philippines. Coming up, cake served in a glass. That's for today's In Focus.